Aloha everyone, it's Ajanette and I am here to do your cognitive theories of personality. We're going to focus a lot on theories that have really informed some modern therapy techniques. In fact, they're probably the most common therapeutic perspectives that are practiced in modern therapy. And then we'll try to also relate those back to personality theory and specifically focus on how they might impact personality traits. That being said, we're exposing you to yet another theoretical perspective so you can differentiate between the different features of the different theoretical perspectives and how collectively they might shape our personality. We're going to draw from the Kelland book this week, specifically focusing on chapter 12, which addresses actually Ellis, Beck, and Kelly, which are all important cognitive perspectives. Before we dive into those three, though, I do want to give you a little background on Jean Piaget. He is a cognitive developmental theorist, and he talked about this notion of how our cognitive skills and functioning develops over time. And he presented this notion of a cognitive schema. And that kind of informs George Kelly's theory for personal construct theory. And Kelly and Ellis and Beck all kind of work together to kind of bridge different aspects of cognitive psychology or cognitive theory. Interestingly enough, George Kelly can also kind of take a humanistic perspective and lens, which will be our next set of theories that we address in the coming week. So let's talk a little bit about, before we get into Piaget, Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, both cognitive theorists, they actually exchanged work with one another. And so each of their individual theories kind of influenced and informed the theory of their counterpart. Both are really grounded in cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck had a more global cognitive behavioral therapy theory, and he presented different strategies for cognitive distortions that might contribute to our psychological dysfunction. And then Albert Ellis actually developed the ABC model, which then informed rational emotive behavioral therapy. And we'll get into those, each of those respective approaches and theories in just a bit. So let's back up and talk about Jean Piaget and his theory of cognitive development. So first of all, Jean Piaget suggested that our cognitive development really just unfolds through a natural maturation process, that given a healthy environment where we're exposed to kind of normative relationships and objects around us and normal social interactions, we're going to naturally develop cognitive skills consistent with the rest of the world. So his theory is about universal cognitive development. He suggested it was a stage progression, so it was discontinuous, and we experience these very qualitative shifts in our cognitive ability and reasoning throughout life, with the stages down here at the bottom: sensory motor happening in our infancy and toddlerhood, pre-operational happening in our early childhood, concrete operational in our middle childhood, and then informal operations that happens in our adolescence and into adulthood. Subsequent theories came along after Jean Piaget and talked about post-formal thinking as well. But your cognitive development is grounded in this concept of a schema. A schema is, imagine like a file folder. It is an organized cognitive structure where you store all that you know about a particular concept. So everything we know about a kitty: it has furs, it has pointy ears, it has a cute little face and a little triangle button nose, and it has claws. All of those things are the facts, the ideas, the conception that we have about Kitty. So we have a file folder in our minds of Kitty. And then as we acquire new information, imagine that like a folder that's opened or a document that's opened on our screen, and we come across new information, we assimilate that into our existing file folder, and we learn new stuff about kitties. Maybe that kitties can be boys and girls. Maybe after a kitty licks us, we learn that it has kind of a spiky tongue. Maybe after it catches a mouse, you learn that it also hunts, right? So you just assimilate that into your existing understanding of kitty. And I want you to draw upon the movie Monsters, Inc. And Monsters, Inc., was a movie. Remember, Boo was the little girl. And how did Boo uh, see Sully? What did she call him? She called him Kitty, right? Because she acquired new information. Here she runs across Sully. Well, Sully has the pointy ears. Sully has the sharp teeth. He has the furry, fluffy skin. He has the claws. That aligns with what I know about Kitty, and so I call him Kitty. So she assimilated her understanding of Sully into her existing file folder of Kitty. Now, he was a giant kitty, right? So she just added that new information to her existing understanding of Kitty and hit save. Accommodation is using the save as feature. It's now saying, oh, I have new information, and it's enough new information where it doesn't fit quite into our existing understanding. So we have to modify or change our existing understanding to account for the new information. And that happened when she saw Sully as a monster on the screen. She was never afraid of Sully before because she never saw him as a monster. She assimilated her understanding of Sully into her concept of Kitty. But once she saw him on the scare screen, then she now recognized he was separate and distinct. And so she accommodated her understanding and now saw him as a monster. That's equivalent to the save as feature, right? So we go through these processes where we build these schemas or these cognitive constructs, our understanding, and we modify them throughout our life based on our experiences. That's going to come in handy when we're studying George Kelly's theory. He also was a cognitive theorist, and like many psychologists, interestingly enough, he had his own kind of childhood concerns and challenges. He was an only child, raised on farms, moved around a lot, had a lot of educational instability. If you've ever moved around, you can only imagine what that was like in terms of making friends, keeping friends, feeling secure, being targeted, all those things, right? And he was kind of a nerd. He loved math and science. So he definitely brought a scientific lens with him into life, right? And into his work as a psychologist. He actually had a master's in educational sociology, so understanding the impact of social relationships on an individual certainly had to be part of his keen awareness, right? Got his PhD in psychology, originally focused on learning disabilities, and became a clinical psychologist working with the Navy after World War II. World War II, as you go on and you transfer, you'll take a history and systems class, and you'll learn about the interesting relationship between the military and the field of psychology. The military provided us with a lot of psychological advancements because it provided us understanding or in access to study and understand various psychological disorders. That said, Kelly presented this personal construct theory. And like Piaget, he suggested that we have these constructs, these mental understandings of the world, and they represent our beliefs, our expectations for outcomes, our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about others, our beliefs about situations, and they guide these constructs, these beliefs, these lenses, right? They guide how we think, how we behave, how we feel, and they actually make up our personalities. Um, you know, in I know that for some people, You're kind of optimists, right? Do you see the glasses half full or do you see the glasses half empty? And some people want to look at the world through rose-colored glasses. Whereas me, I might call that toxic positivity. I might call that, an unrealistic view of the world. And for me, it might place unrealistic expectations on myself and others to be perfect and happy all the time. Well, my life has been filled with trauma, so I see the world a little bit differently. Some may view that as tainted, right? But those different beliefs and expectations shape not just our personality, but our behavior, how we engage with the world, how we see ourselves in the world, how we see our power maybe in the world. This theory suggests that we're like scientists, and our beliefs, our constructs are like our hypotheses. So we're consistently going through life like scientists testing those hypotheses. So we push things to the limit based on our individual expectations. And everybody's beliefs, everybody's constructs are different, right? So you see the world differently based on your experiences, your lens, your individual interpretation than I do. And so you might test the world and your expectations differently. Based on these constructs, we can predict certain events that are in alignment with our expectations that result from these constructs. So we're continuously testing these constructs. Now, there are opportunities to modify the constructs. He suggested that we have this fundamental postulate, right? And this is kind of our expectation of how we expect things to happen based on those perceptions, those behaviors, and based on the personality that has emerged based on the collection of constructs that we have. And he suggested there's 11 corollaries that work, and I've kind of listed it here. So this postulate suggests that we're going through this active dynamic testing process based on these expectations, that we're consistently testing them, and we channel things or filter things through these lenses, and that influences our anticipation of outcomes. And then that therefore then influences how we might think, behave, or perceive a particular situation. So these corollaries shape the expectations in different ways. We have a construct corollary that suggests that we construct these expectations based upon past experiences. So, if I've invested in, I have a financial planning background, and so we predict future investment performance based upon its past growth, its past performance. That's a construct corollary. The individuality corollary suggests that you have unique experiences and perceptions, and so therefore you have unique expectations separate and distinct from my own. So there's that individual nature of each of our constructs and expectations. There's also this organization corollary, which suggests that there's a pattern, a structure, a system, an organization, a hierarchy by which we organize those constructs in our mind. And we might have this expectation of if A, then B, based on that organization. And your organization might be different than mine based on that individuality corollary as well. We also maintain a dichotomy corollary, which is where we have these perceptions of opposites. Maybe we have a perception of being good or bad, moral or immoral, faithful or unfaithful, right? And these dichotomy corollaries may not always allow for the gray, the complex circumstances, or the way in which those things might be mediated or moderated by outside circumstances. There's also this choice corollary that relies upon our ability to actually choose between alternatives, particularly if there's a dichotomy, right? I can choose to be good or bad. I can choose to be an optimist. I can choose to be an extrovert. I can choose to push my boundaries, right? I can choose to challenge my constructs and my expectations and beliefs and assumptions. Then there's the range corollary where my expectations have a reasonable range, right? I may not predict a specific outcome, but a potential range of outcomes. The experience corollary suggests that my expectations and constructs may adapt based on that experience, that outcome. So similar to that accommodation concept, I'm modifying my understandings, my schemas, my expectations based on what I'm experiencing. So it's kind of an evolving and organic process that's occurring, right? It's dynamic, it's complex. Then there's a modulation corollary. I'm going to modulate. I'm going to make adjustments based on new experiences. Like I might have, let me give you an example. My daughter has a really negative, unhealthy, toxic relationship with her father, and she kind of has this negative bias toward men, right? And so she has this expectation of men. Well, she actually developed a really close friendship with a male, and he became her best friend, and it eventually evolved into a romantic relationship. And so she's kind of modulated and has different new expectations of men based on that new experience with a different type of male. Then there's the fragmentation corollary, which suggests that maybe I need to break up or I need to create subsystems for some of those more complex concepts that may not be able to, be explained through a simple methodology. Maybe there is a variety of constructs that need to be involved in a particular behavior or assessment or prediction. Maybe two things aren't compatible with one another, and so I need to have a subset that explains, how I might expect something different based upon that disagreement or that contrast. There's also a commonality theory. This is probably what draws on his sociology background, where, we definitely look to others and we see that others might have similar experiences as us. And so based on the experiences that we observe in others, we might change our individual constructs and expectations. And then there's the sociality, I don't know that I spelled that right, corollary that actually talks about, because I'm connected to this male best friend, right, that my expectations are changing based on that social connection. Or I also am connected to a family unit, to a culture, to something bigger than me. And so that might influence my individual constructs. So all these corollaries are interesting, not something that's always drawn upon or put into practice in a therapeutic world. It's not often that we're dissecting those different corollaries or defining and explaining them, but it's good to understand the different ways in which and the different factors that might impact our expectations, beliefs, and shift our lens throughout life. So fixed role therapy comes out of Kelly's theory. And sometimes it starts with a self-characterization sketch, which is interesting, right? When a therapist asks us to describe ourselves, how would your friend describe you? How would your mom describe you? How would your sibling describe you? Someone that really knows you, how would they describe you? We often get a more authentic description than how you might describe yourself. And some of that might be shyness, humility. Some of it might be pride and arrogance too, right? Some of it might be a self-serving bias where we try to make ourselves sound, better or more powerful, prestigious than we are. But when we're describing ourselves through the lens of a friend, it can often reveal a more authentic analysis. And so even if therapists may not subscribe to this social construct approach, they definitely like to understand how you view you, how you believe others view you, and those different selves that we talked about earlier in the course become really relevant, right? Because this helps to understand your personality as a whole. And sometimes a therapist might give you a fixed role, and they might assign you to take on a specific lens or perspective so you can kind of challenge your own expectations, your own beliefs, get a different perspective, and you can experience the world differently. And maybe for a week or 2 weeks, you're taking on the lens. So let's say in a relationship you're struggling. Maybe they ask you to take on the lens of your spouse, to play the role of your spouse, or let's say, you're the caretaker normally, but you are going to take on the role of the provider, so that you can. And maybe they would ask your spouse to take on the role of caretaking, and allow you to kind of challenge your assumptions, understand and empathize with the roles of others, and gain some new insight from that experience. Those new insights might shift your personality, they might shift your behavior, and they might improve the quality of the relationship. So these constructs that we maintain, these corollaries, these expectations, can shape our personality. These are strategies by which we're willing to modify ourselves, how tightly we're going to hold to particular traits or behaviors or perspectives that aren't serving us well, right? These corollaries suggest that we might, have the ability to adapt them and evolve over time. Okay, moving on to Albert Ellis, very much cognitive theorist. And he was born around the same era. He too had health challenges. He actually started in business. He was an avid writer. He actually wanted to be a writer, and then the Depression came, and that threw him off course. But he did write The Case for Sexual Liberties, and that kind of got him into a position where he became a counselor and consultant to his friends, inspired him to go into a clinical program. He became a psychotherapist, decided he wasn't into Freud's psychoanalytic therapy, and then started to question that and developed his own theory based on his own experiences. He came up with what's often called the ABC model or approach. And over the years, it continued to evolve, and he identified other components. But this often is just the ABC model. I added the D and E so you can see how it's kind of been expanded in more modern times. He actually added a G as well, skipped F, but added a G. And so I'm going to give you an example. A is for activating event. That's a trigger, right? Your B is your belief system, and then C is consequence. So my husband, my first husband, actually cheated on me, and we divorced, and I experienced a bout of depression after that. Now, some might suggest that the divorce or the cheating, the infidelity caused the depression. It really wasn't. It was the B, it was the belief system, right? Because how I interpreted the cheating and the divorce. Now I'm not attractive, I'm not desirable, I'm now a mother that has 2 kids, and because I was a teen mom and then we had a baby, now I had 2 kids from 2 different fathers, so I did a little bit of slut shaming myself. And those beliefs about myself are what caused the depression. After I went to therapy and I was able to identify those faulty beliefs, I was able to identify those unhealthy beliefs, then it changed the emotional consequence. I was no longer depressed. I recognized it wasn't about me, it was about him. So my therapist introduced D for me, disputing that irrational belief. Of course you're attractive. Of course you have a lot to offer a future relationship. You're intelligent, you're kind, you're caring, you're compassionate. You still have men showing interest in you. And that allowed me to challenge and disrupt that irrational thinking that was ultimately causing the depression. Me thinking I wasn't lovable, thinking I wasn't desirable. My therapist, shifting the focus from me to him, but he cheated on his first wife with his second wife, and he cheated on his second wife with a girl that he met from work, and he cheated on you with a girl that he met from work. So it's about him. The cheating's about him, not about you. That disruption and that disputing of that irrational beliefs helped me to reframe, right? And so consequently, there was a new effect. I chose to employ new strategies. I chose to recognize the new information. I chose to replace this belief with a healthier perception, recognizing it wasn't about me. And then finally, the G, which isn't reflected here, allowed me to set new goals for myself. And my new goals, I said, no one can take your education from you. And I chose to stop and pause my education because of his limitations and his abusive approach in our marriage. And I decided to set goals for myself, to get healthy for myself, to be a strong, empowered, independent woman who wasn't in a position of vulnerability like I was with him, to be in a position where I could take care of me and my little ones alone. That gave me new purpose, new vision, and certainly new passion to continue a new life. And I did. And I've since achieved 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, a doctoral degree, and I have a very successful career. Side note, here we are some 25 years later, and the man actually tried to get back together with me most recently, and I was like, dude, I am not that person anymore. That woman is dead. So Ellis then, based on that ABC model, presented this notion of rational emotive behavioral therapy. And that's where the D comes in, this D and the E. These two things are part of the REBT therapy approach, where now you don't just go from A, B, C, right? You challenge those irrational beliefs. You absolutely challenge those beliefs that are causing negative, unhealthy outcomes, whether they're emotions, whether they're behaviors, but you challenge those. So it's very different from behaviorist perspective, where we're just kind of a blob responding from stimulus response, or we're a blob of clay being shaped by reinforcements or punishment in our society. No, we have to filter things through our own cognitive lens now. And when there is an unhealthy or negative response emotionally or behaviorally, then that indicates there's likely an unhealthy, irrational cognitive belief that needs to be addressed. And it's addressed through rational emotive therapy. Let's talk about more realistic, rational ways to conceive the situation. Let's talk about healthier emotional and cognitive responses that then will affect our behavior as well. And so REBT therapy challenges and examines those beliefs. Some of the strategies that they use, or they can challenge and dispute those beliefs, like my therapist did, like I shared with you. They might also do some role playing with you. And it gives you an opportunity to take different perspectives and see maybe the logic in an alternative viewpoint. So it helps you to challenge your own irrational thinking through those different roles and lenses. Sometimes I'll have you journal, and if you just kind of free form journal, right? No particular structure. You just write, you just let your emotions go on a page, and you bring that journaling in, and you might read excerpts of the journaling. You might identify insights that came from that journaling. You might identify negative patterns of thinking. You might identify areas of your personality that you want to work on, that you want to shift and change. And the therapist might also incorporate relaxation training that helps to calm and center you so that you don't just have an event and then an emotional response, but rather you can employ those rational strategies. You can engage in challenging your own thinking and instead choosing a more healthy, empowering cognitive perspective. So there's four basic principles involved in REBT therapy. First of all, you have to provide yourself with an unconditional acceptance. You have to, instead of focusing on the shoulds, right? Recognize there's value in who you are, accept yourself for who you are, and don't put unrealistic expectations on you. You need to extend that same perspective to others, and you have to accept others for who they are, even if you don't agree with them all the time, right? That we can't be placing these irrational and unrealistic demands and expectations on others either. Additionally, we have to recognize we can't control life. We have to accept it as it comes and choose to respond to it in the best, most adaptive, healthy way that we can. And then finally, we need to exercise flexible preference. Recognize that we can have a preference, but it's okay if we don't always get what we want. We need to change our expectations. Things aren't always going to turn out the way that we want them to, and that's okay. So a counterpart of Ellis is Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck is often considered like the father of cognitive psychology, born a little bit younger than Ellis. He actually had many siblings, a couple of whom died. The other two were successful by and large. He actually had health challenges as well, broke his arm, became septic. So consequently, he was hospitalized and he developed some insecurities and even some phobias. He had a phobia of blood, and so he went to medical school, and he's on a surgical rotation. And how do you deal with surgery when you have a phobia of blood, right? And so he actually almost became his own therapist and exercised cognitive strategies to challenge his phobic behavior and response that allowed him to successfully complete medical school. He actually ended up specializing in psychiatry, also influenced by the war, and then he worked with Ellis to create this field of cognitive therapy. Mind you, they came on the heels of behavioral therapy. They too, particularly Kelly, approached things with a very scientific lens, but they could not dismiss the cognitive element. So this cognitive trial suggests that, where the behavioral perspective might just focus on environmental exposures and doesn't really focus on our thoughts or our feelings and just looks at, a stimulus and a response, or a stimulus and a consequence that causes our response. They said, no, it filters through our thoughts, through our cognitive perceptions, and that then influences our emotional response and our behavior. That you cannot go straight from feelings and behavior. You have to have the analysis of the thoughts. And so a situation occurs, and then the thought responds to that situation, which then now influences the reaction, the emotion, the behavior, or even a physiological response. And this is where the relaxation training comes in because you need to kind of be able to slow your body down, and offer your body the opportunity to be centered, and so that you can have more rational emotions, rational thoughts, and then have a different outcome, right? And so Beck's theory focuses on these cognitive distortions that occur. When you're talking about personality, right? Remember that sense of self-esteem and our worth and our value. A cognitive distortion might be very low self-esteem and think that we're worthless and we don't offer any value. Our self-efficacy, if it's a negative self-efficacy, we might have a distorted perception of ourselves and think that we're not capable of anything. And we can engage in what's called all or none thinking. So if I do poorly on a test, all or none thinking says, oh, I'm a failure. I'm a horrible student. I'm not good at math. I can never get this, right? And it's kind of all or nothing. We're not looking at it as I just didn't do well on one single test. I kind of generalize. I might also catastrophize and say, now I'm going to fail out of school. My son today, when I picked him up, he noted that this girl next to him was kind of really skittish, and it felt like she was potentially afraid of him. And he said, all I need is for her to complain and say that I'm some pervert or some creep, and then she complains about me, and then I get kicked out of school, and then there goes my whole career. And I was like, dude, I think that's a bit much, right? That's catastrophizing. Doesn't even know the girl, never even said hello, and all of a sudden she's getting him kicked out of school and ruining his life. That's catastrophizing. And sometimes we do that with ourselves, right? Also, mind reading. Oh, they don't like me. Oh, they think I'm this. They think I'm that. You don't know those things. You're making assumptions. So you have to stop. You don't want them making assumptions about you. You can't make assumptions about them as well, right? Or we do this emotional reasoning where we're actually assuming, we assume that they have negative emotions, and we are unfortunately trying to, hold on just a sec. Sorry, I have to let people know when I'm recording so they don't just burst in. Anyway, emotional reasoning. So I'm looking at a situation through purely like emotional. I'm assuming, I'm emotionally responding based on assumptions, and I'm not really kind of looking at the facts as they are. It's purely an emotional response. We have to be careful about that, right? Because sometimes we might misinterpret our emotions. Or labeling, where I am putting labels and definitions on myself or on others. I might be looking at one single aspect about that person and label them as a result of that, and not looking at the whole person and the complexity of the situation, the dynamic nature of the situation. And so I might be reading it wrong, right? And then personalization, where I might take things personally. I might feel like I'm personally to blame or responsible for outcomes that I had no really impact on. My son does this a lot, where he actually thinks that he's the cause of the divorce between his father and I, and really it had nothing to do with him. His dad and I should have never stayed together. As long as we did. And so we had problems long before he came, and those were only magnified after the children. So um, younger children do this a lot. They personalize, they think they're to blame, and they cause challenges and problems. But it's not, it's a cognitive distortion. And with time and maturity, hopefully they can see things through a new lens. So with Beck's cognitive approach, if you have these distorted ways of viewing yourself in situations, that's going to result in a very negative personality. So I want you to think about what we've talked about so far, and think about, the ocean openness. When you have these negative constructs, like Kelly suggested, and negative expectations, when you have these irrational thoughts, right, and these irrational beliefs, when you have these cognitive distortion from Beck's theory, you're likely not going to be as open to others, to new experience, because you may not have a sense of trust, right, in yourself or others. Think about conscientiousness. You might actually be overly conscientious and self-critical, maybe even self-loathing. Extroversion, you actually might be more of an introvert because you might be fearful and anxious and afraid of critique and judgment of others. When you think about agreeableness, you might be disagreeable because you're sharing your negative constructs, your negative beliefs, expectations, your negative irrational thoughts, your negative cognitive distortions. And so consequently, you actually might be more disagreeable, you might be more irritable, and you might be more emotionally unstable and unpredictable or neurotic. And all of these cognitive distortions or perceptions shape your personality in healthy or unhealthy ways. Now, if you find that there's traits that you want to modify, or there's behaviors or outcomes that you want to modify, you can engage in cognitive therapy. And what Beck's cognitive therapy model does is it takes these negative perceptions, right? This sense of, I'm worthless, and no one loves me, no one values me, and I have a horrible future outcome. And it helps to reframe those. It helps to challenge those cognitive distortions. First of all, gain some self-awareness. They may be activated automatically, but you don't have to ruminate in those lines of thinking. Journaling can actually be a tool to help you identify those negative thoughts and then teach you how to break that connection, understand how those thoughts and those cognitive interpretations shape your emotional and behavioral responses, and so give you ways to challenge those distortions, whether you're finding your own evidence, right, or whether you're doing it through therapy, and to instead of you can't just shut them down, but you have to replace them with healthier mindsets, with healthier ways of reframing. I say that a lot with my students. Let's reframe that. Let's look at that from a different angle, right? Let's frame it through a lens of empowerment, through a lens of self-compassion, through a lens of grace, through a lens of self-love. And when we wrap ourselves in self-love, or let's do role playing, what advice would you give a friend if a friend was describing that situation and providing the rationale and reasoning that you're providing? What would you say to them? Say those things to yourself, right? And challenge that inner critic. Break and disrupt that critique and criticism, and replace it with much more affirming, empowering, loving, compassionate, supportive inner dialogues. So you have to identify those dysfunctional patterns and replace them with healthier, constructive ones. That can help with not only alleviating some tensions and stress in the relationships and situations you're experiencing, but in time, it can reshape your personality to one of optimism, empowerment, openness, trust, confidence in yourself, that gives you more peace in relationships, that does make you more agreeable, because you're not trying to control everything and you are being more flexible and adaptive. So, words of wisdom, Albert Ellis: you mainly feel the way you think. Challenge those negative thoughts, challenge those irrational beliefs. And then Aaron Beck: cognitive therapy seeks to alleviate psychological stresses by correcting faulty conceptions, cognitive distortions, right? Correct those erroneous beliefs, and consequently, we can lower those excessive reactions. We can be more reasoned, we can be more balanced. And with that, I'm going to wish you much love and aloha, much balance, rational, empowering, compassionate, and affirming thoughts of you and those around you for the week ahead. Aloha.